Chapter 11. We need to talk about Kevin Carroll. People identify the EDL primarily with Tommy Robinson, understandably, but none of what happened would have been possible without my cousin Kevin Carroll, co-founder of the EDL, first-class carpenter, builder and five-star bloke. Kev considers himself to construction what Obi-Wan Kenobi was to the Force in Star Wars, the man. The thing is, we're chalk and cheese in just about everything, in every way two blokes can be. We're literally a little and large double act, because I'm this little geezer, 5'6", and he's huge and 6'5". I'm a bit all over the place, disorientated, random and unpredictable, but if you go and pick Kevin up from his house, he'll walk out of the door, then walk back in again to check something or other, then back out, OCD all over. When we're out and about, I can tell you exactly what he's going to do before he does it. He's a proper Boy Scout. If I go pick him up when it's snowing, he'll come out of the house with a blanket, a spade, 4 litres of water. You'd think we'd be going up Everest, not down to Tesco's. Talk about be prepared. If you were ever in an emergency, you'd want Kevin Carroll with you. He'd be great on one of those desert island survival programs. Anyone with a connection with a group like the English Defence League is going to be pigeonholed as a violent right-wing half-wit, as though they eat, breathe and live some kind of all-consuming hatred. This is not the Kevin Carroll that I know. Oh sure, he can stand up for himself. He isn't just big, he's always been big in fitness, physically fitter than blokes half his age. A formidable bloke all round. You still wouldn't mess with him, but he's as soft as a brush at heart. He absolutely loves animals. Some of the lads call him Dr. Dolittle. On one site he was running, he found an injured bird, scooped it up off the floor, brought it to the hut. He fixed the wing, nursed it back to health and kept it in there till it was recovered and strong enough to fly away. That's Kev all over. He's nobody's idea of a fighter. At that size, he's never had to be, although he used to do a bit of boxing when he was younger, but I think he'd throw a wobbler with anyone who hurt an animal. You go up to his house and into the back garden, and there he is feeding 4 or 5 foxes, wild foxes, and they all come to his house. He's not right, if you want my opinion, but I love the man to bits. More than anything, though, Kev's a people's person. He has a presence. At EDL demos, if the crowd was getting edgy, he could get up there and take command of the entire place with a word. He's a proud, born and bred Lutonian, through and through, and although he's never involved in the football hooligan scene, he was a Luton Town fan. He was deeply affected when he lost his beloved nephew, Liam, Lemo Gimo, as Kev called him, in 2007 at the age of 14 after a long illness. Liam was the mascot for the town's first home game that season, and he said it was the best day he ever had. He passed away that same afternoon. It was as though he'd hung on just for that. Kev was one of those blokes who epitomised what the old Luton was about. And seamless mix of black and white communities. He could roll into blues nights at the 5-0 Club, and he was respected by blokes in the West Indian community like Johnny Ashton, Des P, Hiron, Everton B, Jester, Ash, all top lads. Last December he lost a good friend who we both knew and respected. Linos Wilson was one of the Luton's greatest sons. Linos was a volunteer running for the Non-Violence Alliance when gang trouble broke out among the younger members of the black community. And we're talking about repeated shootings. Linos would bring in older lads to go out on the streets. He and Kev were very close. These were men who wanted their town to be a safe and happy place for everyone. But Kev has also, like me, become more and more concerned with what's happening around us with radical Islam over the years. That's the one thing, the one subject at least, about which we most have in common. He had a big job when we were contracting for Little Legs and the hut. which was our site office, and the office ended up as a shrine to everything that was going on with Islam globally. One entire wall was plastered with stories ranging from the attack on the soldiers in Luton and the activities of radicals like Abu Hamza, Omar Bakr Mohammed, to atrocities around the world. The soldiers' homecoming brought things to a head for Kev. He'd never had a criminal record or been arrested until that day. And then 8 CID and uniformed coppers dragged him out of bed at 5:50 a.m. He had his moment in court, though. He said, "I'm 40 years old. I've never been in trouble in my life, and you're now prosecuting me and giving me a criminal record for calling a group of Muslims who spit hatred at our soldiers a bunch of wankers." I heard the tape of the police interview, and you have to picture the scene of Kev and his brief sitting with those officers and a laptop on the table from which you can hear Kevin singing, "She's a whore, Bin Laden's mother's a whore." The coppers say, "Is that you?" Kevin replies, Wow, hold on a minute." And then there's a long pregnant pause, and finally Kev says, "She hasn't made a complaint, has she? Because if she had, I hadn't got a problem with her, just her wanker of a son." Everyone cracked up, even the coppers and the brief. I don't think he could believe it. And it was absurd. He was the first one arrested before the police bothered picking up any of the Muslims who caused all the trouble in the first place. It was as if they only nicked them in order to justify hammering a few of us, giving their belief that a third UPL demo was in the pipeline. Kev was taken to magistrates' court and fined as a result, but boy, did he get his money's worth. It was hilarious. The courtroom was in stitches, although I don't think the magistrates saw the funny side of things. I was wetting myself on the back row of the public seats. The prosecution bloke was getting all serious while reading Kevin's interview. The police accused him of calling the protesters fucking wankers. Well, again, Kevin replied, "Hold on a minute, officer. Are we not all agreed that the bunch of people were fucking wankers? The whole entire country is agreed on that matter, and now you want to prosecute me for saying it?" The way he spoke in his interview was golden. He's a clever bloke, a witty bloke, and he just belittled the whole process, made it all sound so ridiculous, which of course it was anyway. But the police and the courts didn't like that. Not one bit. They found Kevin guilty and fined him, but it didn't end there. He appealed, and the court case went to the Crown Court, by which time everything had moved on because now the EDL had come into being and things were starting to move quite quickly. I was forced to take a long, hard look at myself when Kevin went back to have his appeal against the conviction heard. The appeal went to Luton Crown Court, and about 200 to 300 EDL supporters came to give Kev a bit of a back-in. I bottled it that day because it was in Luton town centre, and because I knew all the local Muslim characters would be there, and because they all knew who I was and I didn't show up. I didn't want anyone knowing it was me behind the fledgling EDL. In a way, it was cowardly, I suppose. I remember being pissed off with myself for not going there to stand by him. I told Kev I was ill, and I left him to front everything up, which he did in man-sized fashion. I remember watching the video coverage of it the next day and thinking, fucking hell, Kev, you've got balls. He walked out of court, and all the EDL supporters and the media were there. He gave a speech about the case, about the police taking him to court. All the EDL supporters walked through the town centre, and I remember watching it on the news. I knew pretty much everyone there on both sides of the divide. There was the big Muslim presence too. It wasn't organised in the same sense of a confrontation, but their community can just gather those members in a matter of minutes. And I think that's what happened in response to the EDL support for Kev. Suddenly the police were faced with coming up with some form of containment strategy in the middle of Luton. So they effectively blocked off the middle of the town, separating into two groups. I remember watching it and thinking that everyone I knew was there, and I wasn't. I'd let everyone down, including myself, but especially Kev. When the BBC got in touch about the rapid growth of the EDL and said they wanted to produce a documentary, young British and angry Kev was the first person to step up. That played a big part in establishing the movement, and if he hadn't done that, perhaps things wouldn't have continued growing the way it did. Meanwhile, I'd been hiding behind a false name and balaclavas, and there was Kev, brave and bold as you like, facing the world. Still, with Kev's character and the courts, I should mention the one time that thing turned out well for him, and which highlights a lot of what we're regularly up against with the police. There was a well-publicised incident 12 months later, on Armistice Day, when hate preacher Anjem Chowdhury's group, calling themselves Muslims Against Crusades, as opposed to the so-called outlawed Al-Mujahideen, planned a poppy burning protest in Luton during the 2-minute silence. A group of us went to London, and I travelled with Kev and other of the lads. Keir. We got off the train, and the police were immediately into everyone. They stopped and searched and then arrested Keir, but we managed to dodge them. The protest was at the Albert Memorial, but about 300 of the lads met up in the pub at King's Cross, and we went across town from there. Chowdhury had made public that he was going to disrupt the 2-minute silence, and if I'd been totally honest with all that had gone on over the past couple of years, I couldn't believe that the police would actually let him. Let him? They might as well have cheered him on. They had Chowdhury and all his radicals penned in, but then we found that the police had reserved another pen for us. I told them we weren't going in. It wasn't our protest. We were just there to honour the occasion. You can imagine how much difference my opinion made. I approached one copper and asked him what all this was about, letting those haters disrupt what was supposed to be a solemn, respectful event. It's freedom of speech, mate, was the best he could manage. At that, I just slipped off on my own. These fanatics were screaming, "British soldiers burn in hell," and I just had to at least try to do something about it. They were waving the black terror flag, which now symbolises ISIS. I climbed up onto a ledge about 40 feet above the crowd, making my way past the police cauldron. It was all of a bit of a Tom Cruise Mission Impossible. But when I climbed down, a bunch of security blokes were waiting for me, except where they then placed me was right in the middle of the police cordon. I couldn't stand quietly by and watch these traitors insult our war dead, completely disrespect the country they were leeching off, so I put my hood up and ran and jumped over the barrier, straight into the middle of Chowdhury and his fanatics. Somebody had to show them not. Everyone was happy to stand silently by. What's more, the fact that fat little old Tommy could manage to hurdle those barriers still got me a drink in some pubs. Check it out on YouTube under Tommy Robinson, Poppy Burning. Pretty impressive athletic ability, but a little fat geezer, if I say so myself. There was a bit of a fracas, but once the police followed me in and dragged me away, they stopped the protest, so I suppose I succeeded in achieving something. But then I was arrested and charged with assaulting a police officer, which once more was completely and utterly bollocks. I was only saved from a probable 3 to 4 prison sentence, given my previous offence, because a TV cameraman had the entire incident on film. When they hit me with that charge, he let me have the footage. Yet another case based on police lies thrown out of court. Afterwards, as I was sitting in the police station looking out of the window, a van pulled up, and getting out was Kev again. I couldn't help but laugh. They'd arrested him for a fray or violent disorder, some such bollocks. They said he picked up a metal crash barrier and threw it at the police, which I must say was completely out of character for him. He'd have his day on that one, though. Then they took him away for a strip search for good measures, which would completely ruin his day. That night, when they let us out and I got home, my missus had her nan round and she wasn't impressed. Again, she said, "You've been arrested again." And I said, "They were burning poppies. What we were supposed to do?" She said, "Oh, it's too late. They've taken over." I just couldn't get that. I just couldn't understand that. I told her that if everyone had that attitude in 1930s, you'd all be talking German. The incident at the Albert Memorial and the charges they tried to make stick contributed to a larger picture with all of these repeated picky little something or nothing arrests, like the time in Bury Park when they tried to do me for possessing a motor that was supposedly a ringer but never was. None of it made sense until I got taken to court for an incident at the demo in Blackburn. On that occasion, I got into a scrape with a far-right idiot who had no place being there. When it came to court, the police produced a dossier to try to have an ASBO, antisocial behaviour order, enforced against me. They were building all this bullshit up to try and get me banned from not only attending EDL demos, but from associating with the group at all. An ASBO with almost limitless scope to restrict an individual would have solved all their problems in one go. Thankfully, the judge saw it for what it was, an attempt to silence freedom of speech and freedom of congregation, and refused it point blank. They were building all these up in order to keep me away from any form of public protest. We were not breaking the law, but we were seriously inconveniencing the police. So what better than an ASBO? That's what we petitioned for after the UPL demo, to try and have the Muslim extremists stopped from preaching in the town. If you break the ASBO, you can be away to jail, which makes the law happy either way, whether or not you've committed a crime worthy of being locked up, which I hadn't. They'd already got Kev for swearing at the Luton homecoming parade, and I think they reasoned that they'd knocked something together on the poppy burning too, except that it didn't work out too well on that occasion. I'd noticed that every time we were in court, there was one police officer, a Detective Constable Herring, who was apparently involved in public order issues for Scotland Yard every time I was in court. Anyway, anywhere I looked, I'd look, and this bloke would be sitting back there watching. I used to wonder what he was doing, but it was part of a coordinated attempt to make our lives as difficult as possible. For instance, when they put Kev on trial for throwing the metal barrier, it was scheduled for the same day that I was in court for the incident with the far-right idiot in Blackburn. It meant we couldn't be there to support each other, and any EDL support for us would be split in two. They put Kev through it over that charge. 5 court visits after 12 months, with 2 to 4 years sentence hanging over his head. On the day of the trial, both of his defence witnesses bottled out, texting to say they wouldn't be coming to give evidence. His heart must have been in his boots. In Kev's case, 5 officers were called to give evidence. They stood and took the oath and said one by one that he had picked up the metal barrier and thrown it at them, except the meatheads hadn't done their homework very well this time. They hadn't sat down and fabricated their statements as expertly as they might usually, because Kev's barrister ripped them to shreds. In court, on the Bible, the evidence of every single one was different. One said that Kev picked up the barrier over his head. One said he threw it to the side, etc., etc. The female judge actually gave them a bollocking, and she threw the case out. No luck there then. So the police raided his house and arrested him on a proxy minor charge about public order bullshit, the same as they eventually did to me. When my case for assaulting a police officer at the poppy burning came up, my solicitor told me not to even bother attending court. He had the video footage of the entire incident, and yes, I jumped over the barrier, but in no way did I assault the policeman, and the video showed it all. The case was thrown out of court, as my solicitor predicted. Happy ending then? You'd think so, wouldn't you? But it takes more than truth and a court to keep a determined copper down. 4 weeks later, they came and arrested me again over the same incident, and this time charged me with a public order offence. Like Kev, they said that when I jumped the fence, I caused distress and alarm to those Muslims burning the poppies. They also arrested a couple of Muslim protesters too. The court fined the poppy burners £50 and they fined me £350 for upsetting the poor little sensitive sweethearts. Good old British justice, eh? As much as a lot of focus around the EDL has been on me, good or bad, Kev Carroll was front and centre during these early days. Later, when things started falling apart for me personally and the EDL generally, Kev was right there for me, as he always had been. He might not have been, though, not at all. I've mentioned my half a dozen OSMA warnings for death threats, but there was no warning letter on one particular occasion when Kev had a close shave, just a knock on the door. I got a call from Kev's wife. Someone had been to their house in the middle of Farley Hill and banged on the front door. Kev looked out of the window and saw someone walking away. It seemed this person had thrown something at the door and left. So Kev waited a minute, then thought he'd go and see what had happened. He got in his van and drove off to the end of the road, and there was a bloke walking with the hood up. Kev pulled over and asked him if he'd seen any kids messing about, as anyone might. But then the bloke turned round and he was clearly a Muslim, and he put his hand inside his hoodie, at which point Kevin thought that something wasn't quite right. He started to walk towards Kev, who immediately shot off in the van, racing back to his house, and as he pulled up on the driveway and got out, he saw and heard his wife screaming at the window. The Muslim assassin was running after her, and by now it was plain to see that he had a shotgun. Kev legged it away from the house with his geezer chasing him, but not getting close enough that he'd be in range of the shotgun. If he got within 20 yards, then Kevin was in some serious shit. Can you picture this big middle-aged bloke running like Linford Christie with a would-be killer after him? Kev jumped over the fence, trying to get away, smashed his foot, broke his toe in 6 places and popped his right knee out. So he was cursing, having hurdled the fence with his leg in agony, whilst on the other side of the fence, the son of a Bin Laden couldn't both climb it and carry the gun at the same time. Afterwards, all Kev could go on about was his toe. You should have seen the size of it. It looked like Shrek with a bad case of gout. We laughed our asses off. On the serious side, his wife had rung the police and they sent around officers, and automatically they sent some to my house too. It was about midnight and I had my whole road swarming with armoured cops, who I could tell didn't believe a word of what Kevin had said happened. This was a few days before our biggest demonstration to date, the Luton Homecoming in 2010, and I could tell they didn't believe it. But when they got round to their door-to-door inquiries on Kevin's arrest, they got 4 independent witnesses to verify it. It was about 24 hours later that they realised the shit was really serious. At that point, they called both of us to arrange a meeting with a senior officer and offered to give us new identities and put us on the protection programme. But of course, that would mean relocating our families, and they said we'd need to completely cease contact with the EDL. They told us we could never be involved with the organisation and would have to keep quiet forever and a day. We were in Kevin's when they came to make the offer, and the police were sitting there When my mobile phone rang and I answered it on loudspeaker, it was Muslims, and they were saying stuff like, "You fucking dead, you're fucking pussy." The police chief was sitting there, and I simply told him that I got that every day. Kevin and I told them we weren't interested in a new identity, that it wasn't happening, which was absolutely a disappointment, if only because it would have made a lot of their problems go away on a local level. In the event, they got an armed guard on our houses for a week, and after that they left police cars on our driveways for about a month. On one hand, it was good to have the police there because I can't say I'm overly impressed with some of the ways they have reacted to threats against me. But on the other hand, you can imagine how the neighbours took it. Where I was living at that time, in this quiet little cul-de-sac, no one knew who I was. My daughter had just started nursery, and the woman who ran it lived in our road. My wife was hysterical over it all. You can understand why. They put on a witness appeal for the bloke with the shotgun, but all we got were accusations from the far left. That was all made up, for publicity purposes, that it didn't happen. They should have seen Kev's toe. After that, the police put fireproof letterboxes in our houses and gave us a range of security measures like panic buttons, but the bastards still managed to torch Kevin's van on another occasion. Kev, being a Boy Scout, had a CCTV set up all over the house. He was just sitting at home when two Muslim lads set fire to the tyres of his van directly outside the house. He actually thought the house next door was on fire, and the CCTV footage shows him coming hurtling out of his dressing gown with a fire extinguisher. He thought he was going to have to pull old Mr. and Mrs. Smith or whoever out of their blazing gaff. But he ended up running around his own van in his dressing gown, putting out his own burning tyres out. We howled laughing when we saw that, which a lot of people might think is ridiculous, but it's one of those things. If you don't laugh, you go mad, or you'd have a breakdown. It was only when Kevin checked the CCTV later that he saw they first tried to pour through his letterbox, which luckily was now screwed down. They were trying to burn the house down with people inside. People were always giving me shit for using a false name, and I tell them they have not got a clue. If you knew Kevin Carroll in Luton, then you knew exactly where he lived. That bloke did it all with his head up, without hiding. I'm the one more likely to fly off the handle, which may or may not be a bit of a little man syndrome, but Kevin has. I don't know a presence. If you're in his company, he can impress you, without having to be all mouth like some people. I had a massive presence with the lads, with the EDL followers as well. He was never one of the football crowd, because he never needed that in his life. He just is a pretty together bloke. Once I finally got my head around what this thing needed to be, what had to be done with the EDL, it became a complicated, solid thing between the two of us. It was a great combination. Kev didn't need the ego trip of being leader. He was just about the cause, the idealism of what we were doing. When I see him now, Kev will occasionally look at me and shake his head and say that it was all completely mad, as though he needs someone to name check him and say, "Yes, brother, you're completely off your head." But he was the man you wanted at your side in everything. When we got nicked in Switzerland for the FIFA protest, we were together. He never flinched if the point we were making was right. There probably was a madness in it at times, when everything seemed to be getting out of hand, and it appeared to be bigger than us. But I always knew that if I was going to get killed in and amongst the madness, then Kev was willing to get killed and vice versa. We sort of bounced off each other and kept one another going. He was the sensible one, such as you can have someone sensible in the middle of all this madness. when it all went down, when I got locked up and literally thrown into the wolves in the prison system, there was only one man in the world I'd wanted with me, but it turned out he was also going through completely unnecessary shit on the outside. Kevin Carroll is a top bloke, and boy, he is funny. Even if he has a completely fucked up toe and a dodgy knee.